Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Steel Sanctuary podcast. I'm your host, Dave Ribeiro from SteelSanctuary.com. And today we've got a special guest, Bob Quinn, co-host of the Steel City Rings podcast, is with us. Bob, how you doing?
I'm doing outstanding. Happy to be
Thanks
here
for
and talk about some Steelers football.
absolutely. Thanks for coming on. Why don't we start with the latest? Trenton Thompson and Denzel Mims both cut this week. A lot of speculation that they're opening up roster spots for a certain 49ers receiver, maybe, or something like that. Where do you
Yeah.
stand on that whole?
Well, I saw Kaboli on the Starkey show today. I was watching the live feed, and he brought up a pretty good point. You know, the Steelers, especially this time of year, they don't have to create a roster spot. I mean, if they did the trade, it's likely those guys would have got cut. I'm really surprised about the Trenton Thornton cut because I thought he played pretty well down the stretch for us last year, and I really wanted to see him get an opportunity. I figured with, you know, just with Deshaun Elliott, with Demonte KZ, with Minka, he might not get a huge opportunity, but for all the fans who are clamoring for us to sign Justin Simmons, I was like, okay, well, which one
Yeah.
of those three are you going to get rid of? Because it's not going to be Elliott. You just signed him. And I
Mhm.
think he'd be pretty disappointed if he wasn't kind of the de facto starter. The Steelers play a lot of free safety sets, so he'd still see the field plenty. But, then if you do bring in a Simmons, you got to get rid of KZ. You're probably not going to get rid of Elliott unless you just keep him as a depth piece. Uh, Denzel Mims, I know the reports were that he was doing pretty well in the OTAs. So I'm a little surprised they released him. So do I think they'll trade for Brandon Ayuk? I'm kind of in between Kaboli on this. He said no. I say it's possible. I think all the people who thought it was going to happen pre-draft, I didn't think so. I thought the Steelers wouldn't pay. Hey, we're going to give up a first or a second right before the draft
Yeah.
for a receiver you'd pay. I could see them doing like a Minka type deal now. If you were going to get a first straight up for Ayuk, I would maybe make that deal only because I really, and I know a lot of fans have a problem with this, but we've covered this on our podcast a bunch, is the new NFL. Look, I love the Steelers way. I started rooting for the Steelers in the 70s. I love defense. I love running the
Me
football.
too.
The reality is, though, it's not the NFL anymore. I mean, Miami's paying
Hmm.
two receivers $60 million. So
Hmm.
I made the argument a couple of weeks ago that Ayuk could actually be a bargain at 25, $30 million with the way the wide receiver market is going. Because let's face it, Justin Jefferson getting paid 35 million, contracts
Yep.
go up. They don't go down.
Yep. You got that right. Especially a wide receiver, they
Yeah.
definitely go up. I was surprised at Trenton Thompson too. I'm not sure where that came from, honestly. Denzel Mims, I was hoping that he might provide something that they don't have, a bigger wide receiver, maybe a little less speed than what they've had.
Mhm.
Either one is replaceable. Let's be honest. And as far as the Brandon Ayuk thing, I go back and forth almost daily at this point. Are they going to? Is it possible? Sure. Is it not exactly the Steelers' way to trade a first round pick, then pay a guy, probably make the guy the highest paid player on the team, which is
Yeah.
probably what Brandon Ayuk would be at 30 million bucks. I don't know where to
Is,
land on this.
isn't
I really
TJ
don't.
32?
Oh, you may be right. Actually, is he the
I mean,
32
it's
this year?
close. It'll be
It's very
1
close.
2. Yeah, it'll be 1 2. I mean,
And even still, even the second highest paid, it's not like them to do that, to bring someone from the outside and put him in that kind of hierarchy. But they need a number two. I don't know what happens going forward. I don't think they can go with what they have right now. I really don't.
I really like Roman Wilson. I loved him coming out in the draft. I mean, there were a couple of bigger receivers I would have liked to have seen because I think Wilson is just a shade under what I mean at 5'10". AJ Brown is I think he's like 6'1".
Mm-hmm.
So the comparisons of like Roman Wilson, AJ Brown, because I love the hey, no block, no rock coming out of Michigan. He came from a running offense. So I do think he's valuable. It's a lot to count on a rookie. But now you look at it. So let's say you get Ayuk and you pay him reports are he's very unhappy with the $26 million that San Francisco
Yeah,
offered him.
he's not settling for that. No way.
Yeah. Well, then again, who would have thought Dante Jackson would take a 50% pay cut after the trade? When we traded Deontay, I mean, it looked like about an even swap as far as cap wise, and then Omar pulls some magic,
Yeah,
and he takes less. Maybe they tell Ayuk, hey, look, if you'll take an average of 26, we'll give you a 5 year instead of a 4 year. Although 26-year-old receiver, that's kind of borderline. I mean, they can up the
yeah.
guaranteed money, but it's kind of not the Steelers' way to do
Nah,
that.
they
I mean,
they definitely don't like the guaranteed money thing overall. Um,
I thought it was interesting. Kaboli said on Starkey they did their free association. If you're not familiar with it, it's a funny segment when Kaboli comes on the Joe Starkey show, and the free association. He said no Ayuk, no Debo, no to Cortland Sutton, and then Starkey asked him, so they're just going to roll with what they got, and he was like, no, I think they are going to bring somebody in, and Starkey was like, who? He said, whoever gets cut August 29th.
yeah, is that who you really want to be the number two receiver? Some guy who wasn't good enough to make his team coming out of training camp?
Depends on whose team he couldn't make. I mean,
Yeah, true.
it depends. I mean, it's
I'm trying to
weird.
think of someone. I don't. Nothing comes to mind anyway.
Yeah,
Uh,
I'm the same way. Maybe if some, third string guy who flashes in the preseason, who looks all of a sudden, or, then again, maybe somebody like, maybe they take a flyer on Michael Thomas closer to training camp on just the hopes that he can somehow recapture
yeah,
something of his previous glory, which, down the stretch last year, he actually played pretty well his last 3 or 4 games. There were signs that maybe he was back a little bit, but it's what, 3 years removed now since his
yeah,
last real good season.
big season. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
So
the injury bug with him, that you're really risking. Not that you're going to pay him a lot, but all of a sudden he starts playing well, and then he goes down. Then you're kind of back to square one again. Um,
with the
it's
Arthur
it.
Smith offense too, Roman Wilson, a combination of Roman Wilson, Van Jefferson. I mean, there's a very good likelihood Pat is actually the number 2 receiver.
Yeah, we've talked about that. He's going to be, as if things stand pat, he's going to probably be the number two guy as far as
Yeah.
receptions and stuff like that. There has been some talk that Roman Wilson struggled a little bit in minicamp.
Yeah.
That's a little concerning. Uh,
There's
what's your
been
take on
some.
Calvin? Go ahead.
I was going to say there's been some reports though initially, and I know as training camp went on, or not training camp, but OTAs went on,
Yeah.
that they said he struggled a little bit, but the initial reports out of it were he looked really good coming across the middle of the field. There was a noticeable burst. And it could be they are asking him to run more traditional intermediate and deep routes that Arthur Smith likes versus those
Yeah.
short crossing routes. And I assume you were going to say Calvin Austin.
Calvin Austin, yeah. He's gotten rave reviews. I'm not the biggest Calvin Austin fan in the world. I don't know how he works in an Arthur Smith offense. There is no block in Calvin Austin. He's just too small.
Yeah.
Maybe as a slot deep threat, I don't know where he fits in this offense, to be quite honest.
Maybe maybe in third down sets where Smith does occasionally use the three. I mean, he runs 12 personnel more than anybody in the NFL.
Yeah.
So when Austin gets on the field as a slot, I mean, I just want to see him not be a gadget player because that's what he was with Matt Canada.
Yep.
He lost that first year. Last year, it seemed like we'd occasionally, and everybody on the field knew it when he came in. You're going to jet sweep with Calvin Austin, except for that one bomb that kind of offset it. So now it's either if he goes in motion, it's a jet sweep. If he stays there, he's going deep. Play 2 guys over him, and
Yep.
and then Kenny struggled so badly trying to get the ball to him, and they really didn't use him when Mason was in. So I'd like to see if he could maybe, turn into a decent little slot, but I don't see him as more than maybe a low end wide receiver 3, a high end wide receiver 4. I'm not sold on Van Jefferson at all. And I think if that's the plan,
Neither
we
am
got
I.
big problems. So
Yeah. I mean, yeah, after the Roman Wilson and maybe Calvin Austin, it's throwaway guys. Van Jefferson, and the rest of them. I don't know the plan. I don't know the process of what they're trying to do, other than they're just saying, "Screw it, we're going to be in 12 personnel 90% of the time." You know, we'll just use our tight ends and call it a day. Dave and I have talked on the podcast about this might have gotten away from Omar a little bit. You know, there have been some that have speculated that he kind of ignored free agency, trying to make a trade, and then by the time he got around and trades were drying up, the free agency itself had dried up. I kind of subscribe to that a little bit, where he spent so much time and energy trying to pull off a trade that all the free agent options kind of found homes elsewhere.
Yeah, I don't know that there were any really great free agent options this year. It was a weird year for wide receivers.
It really was.
It was either A plus or I mean, it always seemed like the trade was going to be if you were going to go get somebody, you were going to have to go get somebody. I know, a lot of fans were, Tyler Boyd. Ray and I went at it about Tyler Boyd on our podcast. I mean, a cast off third string 30-year-old wide receiver. I'm sorry. That's not the guy I wanted. The only quibble I had, I loved where we got Roman Wilson, but I felt like corner and wide receiver should have been more of a priority in the draft if you were going to slide. And I always thought that was going to be the plan was, you're going to get your third string corner, you're going to get your number 2 wide receiver in the second or third round. And Roman Wilson could absolutely be that, but I think there was a chance to get better guys that we kind of let slide. I mean, I'm happy with Fatano. Zach Frazier, it was a position of need, so I get why we went there, especially when he fell.
Yeah.
But then it became, hey, maybe package that third and fourth and let's jump back up and get one of these guys, and we just didn't do it. So I'm sure there's somebody we're not thinking about that's, on a roster who's going to be unhappy, who's maybe going into the last year of his contract, kind of like, Ayuk, and a guy that we're just not going to see. Would I love to see DK Metcalf be the mystery guest? Yeah, I would, but I don't think in a million years Seattle would trade him. And if they do,
yeah,
that's great because that's a huge bargain. I think he's making like $20 million a year. All of a sudden, he's cheap.
Oh yeah, he's cheap. That's a cheap contract for him for sure. At the way this wide receiver market, I heard on, I think it was Mike Lombardi's podcast, that the Seattle general manager said they're not moving him. I mean, that could be general manager speak too, but it doesn't seem likely that they're going to move him. I mean, yeah, it's going to have to be a mystery name. I've bandied the Tyreek Hill name around a little bit. He's already searching for a bigger contract. You're probably in the same boat with an older player if you want to trade for him, right? He's excellent. I love him.
That's a great idea. I wonder. All right, so the rumor is at least 4 for 100, probably 4 for 120 to realistically get Ayuk. Would I do 3 for 100 for Tyreek Hill? Heck yeah!
I think I would too.
Yeah, I mean, and you could, and Steelers, I know they don't guarantee beyond first year money most of the time, but you guarantee half his contract. And the real question is, would Miami be willing to trade him? I mean, especially with now they've given Waddell the money. I mean, I don't know what their depth chart looks like, but Tyreek Hill is such a difference maker. I mean, he really is. I mean, he's made Tua a bunch of money.
Yes, he has. He's a difference maker. He's top 3 in the league as a difference maker. He makes everyone on offense better. There's no way around it. You have to account for him every single play. I think he's over 30 now, which is a little concerning.
Mm-hmm.
But like you said, 3 years, you probably don't have to give up a first-round pick. I mean, you can wiggle around that. That's my other concern with an Ayuk trade is I'd really like to hold on to next year's first-round pick just in case this Russell Wilson, Justin Fields thing goes south. You're going to need a quarterback next season, and you need your first-round pick.
Well, that's a good point. So let me ask you a question. When you say go south, say go south, what's your worst case scenario for this season?
My worst case scenario is Russell Wilson becomes unplayable,
mm-hmm.
and then Justin Fields can't pick up this offense quick enough, and you're just barely above Matt Canada level offense throughout the season. And then you don't know, because they're going to go with Russell Wilson, right? They're going to start the
Right.
season with him. So how many games into it before they decide to change if he's struggling?
I'd have to
And
say,
then
yeah, I'd have to say 3 terrible games and probably 8 Kenny
below
Pickett level
average,
games.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then you've got 8 to 10 games to decide if Justin Fields is your guy, and throwing him in cold in his first year in the offense where he's already struggled most of his career. I don't know if that goes well. So, yeah, then you're looking for a quarterback in 25.
Yeah, but
And I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility either. I don't think
no,
that's, crazy.
yeah, no, I agree that we absolutely could be looking for a quarterback, but uh, I mean, think about how bad. I mean, you don't realize it during the season because you're like, oh well, we played pretty good here and we played pretty good there, but I mean, it was pretty god awful when you look back on it last year.
Oh, absolutely.
And if Wilson or Fields can play at Mason level, then we could win 11 or 12 games. But let's say they play at Kenny Mitch level, we still won 10 games. We won 9
Yeah.
games a year before. So if we're going to win 8 to 10 games, which I think is the absolute floor with Mike Tomlin, because I can't see us losing 4 or winning 4 or 5 games, which means we're probably picking 18 to 25 in a bad quarterback class, definitely the worst quarterback class since Kenny. And then
Kenny Pickett all over again.
yeah, then what are we getting? I mean,
That's a good point.
I'm
That's a
kind
good
of
point.
I'm kind of all for the idea of okay, we give these guys another tool, and if we're on the free agent market next year, I know some people have floated the idea of Dak, which I would
Yeah.
please, if you're thinking
No.
Dak, don't. We don't need another quarterback whose rap is he can't win playoff games.
Yeah.
But if we, it won't be Baker Mayfield, but if it was a guy kind of like that, maybe rebounding off of it, we take a 1 year and see what happens. Personally, I think if Justin Fields was smart, and I think he is, I mean, he would immediately go to Omar and say, "Look, I'll sign a 3 year deal. I was supposed to get $20 million this year. Give me 10 for 2 or 3 years, with incentives and guarantee my spot. So I'll sit behind Russell. I'll be a good soldier, and if we have a good year, I'll sit behind him again next year. But just show me there's a commitment to me long term, and then take a couple of years and really work on his stuff." The other thing is, if Russell Wilson does really good, and we're thinking, hey, Arthur Smith's the perfect coordinator for Justin Fields. If we win 11, 12 games and win a playoff game, I think there's a good chance Arthur Smith gets another job.
That's true. That is true. And we've thrown about the idea, what's the end game with Russell Wilson? If he has a great year, we win 10, 11, 12 games and a playoff game. Now you're looking at, he's going to want to contract $30, $40 million with the quarterbacks going 50, 55 for the younger guys.
Dak
Do you want to
wants
commit
60.
that kind of, yeah. Do you want to commit 30 plus, maybe 40 to Russell Wilson?
I think if it was like a 2 or 3 year deal, depending on what he does, if it's
Yeah.
a 2, no more than 3 year deal, kind of like the Baker deal was. If we could do 33 for 3 years with Russell, and he shows this year he's rebounded, which I'm skeptical about. The idea is kind of growing on me because all the reports are so positive, and Kaboli was so negative on him before they signed him, and now he's so high on him because how he's looked. Then again, it could be because you were watching Kenny and Mitch the last couple of years, and all of a sudden, just barely competent quarterback play looks awesome. So I don't know. I mean, I think Justin Fields for the long term. I mean, if Fields was coming out in the draft, this next year, and he's still a young guy. I mean,
Yes.
he's barely 25. So I mean, he's got 10, 15 years left. He would go in the top 5. I mean, he might be the
Yeah, he
number
would.
1 overall quarterback pick this year. So, do I think he'll sign 3 years? No, but I feel like if Omar wanted to really approach him, and he could just be taking the wait and see approach, And Zach on our podcast, Zach Franciscus, speculated that this is the reason Tomlin got a 3-year extension instead of a 2 or a 1-year extension, was they are planning on, hey, we're all in, we want everything to go good. But if it's not, we're going to give Tomlin 1 extra year so that when we move on to the next quarterback, if it doesn't, he's got a 2-year window, not a 1-year window. Me personally, I would have given him 2, but Zach did have a good point on that.
Well, while we're on it, what did you think about the Tomlin extension? Are you a fan of it? Not a fan?
Not even a little bit. And here's why.
Oh,
it's
really?
not yeah, it's not so much about Mike Tomlin. I mean, I know there's popular tropes all over social media. He won with Cowher's players. I don't think that's true.
Yeah, I don't buy that either.
Yeah, maybe with Cowher's culture, but I mean, he still had to coach the guys.
That might be a better point, the culture part. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
The moment I soured on Mike Tomlin, I was a fan till 2018, and playoffs on the line in New Orleans, inside our own 40, late in the fourth quarter, we fake a punt on 4th and 10. Don't even come close to getting.
I remember.
We have a world-class defense. Why did we not punt the ball down the field? It's Drew Brees. I get it. But let him go down and tie the game or take the lead. Ben still had a shot. I think there's a better chance they pick up a penalty or something happens to New Orleans if we kick that deep. I've been down on him ever since. I'm down on his game management, his techniques, or his schemes, his coaching. It used to be he was good at press conferences, and last year I thought he got very, very, very bad at press conferences. Walking out on Brooke Pryor's question,
Yeah, that was huge.
which was a legitimate question. Football
Absolutely.
justice. What kind of crap is football justice? I mean, so it's not so much that I think he's a bad coach or a bad guy. I mean, he's a Hall of Fame guy. I'm happy we've had him, but it's been 17 years, longer than Cowher. Now he's going to be 3 years. He's going to end up coaching more games than Noel because the seasons are longer. And I think that's why they gave him 3 years. He's got to win 20 out of 51 games to tie Chuck Noll for the most wins in Steelers history. If he goes 21-30, he breaks the record. Mike Tomlin is not going to go 21-30. I mean, he might go 26-25, but I think they set it up to break the record. And I kind of think that Art Rooney, because of his legacy, he's the guy who hired Tomlin, doesn't care if he doesn't win a playoff game. He just wants to see him. He ain't going to pass Nolan Super Bowls. I mean, knock on wood, I hope he does. But,
yeah, we'd all be elated if he did. But
yeah, if he passes Nolan wins, I think Rooney is going to be somewhat, happy and justified. I also think he's older than Dan Rooney was when Dan passed the team to Art back in the early 2000s. The other Dan seems ready. I mean, he's kind of grown up in the organization, ex-college quarterback. He's a lot on the business side. He's very involved with the Steelers Ireland deal. I mean, I think it's time for him to take over, and maybe this is a way to guarantee that his first act won't have to be to get rid of Tom.
that's possible too. I get where you're coming from with Mike Tomlin. It's the coaching a game on gut feeling instead of, having some kind of plan. It drives everybody crazy. I mean, it's,
right.
His decisions, his challenges, even his game plan sometimes leave you really scratching your head. On the other hand, it can be much worse. I tell my podcast partner this all the time. It's so hard to get the right guy, and you can really screw this up by hiring the wrong coach if you move on from Mike Tomlin. And I'm not usually like this play it safe type thing. Yeah, Mike, I hate to say it because I hate the no losing seasons thing, but he gives you a really high floor. And the ceiling might be a little lower than we like, but I'd hate to see them move on from Tomlin and pick a coach, and then we'll end up like so many of these other teams and coaching carousels and moving on.
Yeah, but I mean, when you've had 3 coaches in basically my lifetime,
I
was born in '68, and so hey, it's all of a sudden it could be a coaching carousel if you get rid of the guy. Well, nobody knew who Bill Cowher was. I mean, he's basically a special teams coach. He had a little bit of defensive coordinator experience. they hired Mike Tomlin extremely young. I mean, Tomlin or Noel, people knew from the Colts defensive coordinator, but he didn't have any head coaching experience. So,
Hmm.
I mean, I'd be willing to roll the dice that they're going to get that right. But at the same time, for every good Noel or Tomlin thing, there's an equal one. Like
Absolutely.
he's only coached one game in his career where the Steelers have been eliminated from the playoffs. That's
Hmm.
great. That's better than the losing season thing. But when you start talking about the losing season thing, okay, the Steelers have only had 7 losing seasons since they drafted Terry Bradshaw. That's 50 years ago. I
Hmm.
mean, so
That's a good
the
point.
whole
That's
and the last losing season brought us Ben.
yeah. Yep.
So,
Yep.
then you look back at Tomlin and you say, okay, well, you know, he's done all these good things, and he's good in the community. He seems to be good with the players. Although I would make the argument that some of the players, a lot of the credit he gets, according to Mike Florio, and this is the one of the things that bugs me, he gets a lot of credit for managing Antonio Brown. And everybody says, oh, and nobody else could have got that out of Antonio Brown. Antonio Brown wanted to get paid. And he was no solid citizen before he got his second contract. Ryan Clark always talks about how he got
Yep.
in the fight with Dick LeBeau. And his own dad says, hey, he lost his first scholarship in college because he got in a fight. So, I mean, how much did he really manage that? But even still, going back to the point, okay, so Mike Tomlin, he gets all this credit for being the players' coach and everything else. 17 seasons, he's been in the playoffs 11 times. 4 seasons, he's won a playoff game. 2 of those, we went to the Super Bowl. But in the last 12 years, I mean, if you don't know it, Matt Moore, Alex Smith, and AJ McCarron. That's who we beat in the
Yes.
playoffs.
I
We've
wrote
lost.
articles about that back in the day because people would rave about those playoff wins. I'm like, let's back up. That they
Yeah,
didn't exactly. Yeah, you're 100% right. You're 100% right in everything you say. Um, and I think I would say that his player management is overrated. We
yeah, I
had
would agree.
we had someone on that said, and he told us this off air, but he lost the wide receiver room last year completely.
Mhm.
Like it was a disaster. People weren't showing up for meetings. He lost it, and he seems to lose players because of
Mhm.
his kind of let the players police themselves type of attitude. That doesn't work for young players. When he took over and had all those veterans, that was great. Fine, those guys can police themselves. Those guys can, because they're veterans. We've seen it more and more lately,
Mhm.
where the veterans are going away, and we're trying to rely on younger players. That doesn't work.
Look at I would submit the guy's been in the news a lot lately. Cam Hayward. I would submit Mike Tomlin has done him a disservice, and Cam Hayward has done himself a disservice too. You let a guy like Cam Hayward police himself, and yes, he's a great guy off the field. And please don't take this wrong if you're watching the podcast. It's not that I don't like Cam Hayward and I don't want him to retire as a Steeler, but this is a guy who's chippy. This is a guy who every year it comes up that he gets in training camp fights. He's supposed to be the leader of the defense and the de facto leader of the team since Ben retired. Well, remember a couple of years ago, Minka had to get on him in the Ravens game for being
Yeah,
chippy,
absolutely.
and so Cam Hayward has played in 8 playoff games in his career. Never in an AFC Championship game. Wasn't his fault. He was hurt the year that the Steelers went when he was on the team. But the Steelers are 1-7 in those playoff games. He has 1 sack in 8 playoff games, 2 tackles for loss. TJ's never won a playoff game. So if Cam is leading you down this road of, hey, we never win and we're just happy with good enough, has Tomlin, by letting him police himself early in his career, did he do him a disservice? Maybe he should have
Maybe.
been saying, hey, look at James Harrison over there. He's killing himself. You should be listening to James Harrison. And I know they kind of fell out with James Harrison a little bit, but, me personally, that would be my strength and conditioning coach. I think Tomlin should go to him and beg him to be the strength and conditioning coach. You want to change guys' attitudes on the team? Put Harrison in charge of them for a little while.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, I've had my issues with Cam Hayward over the years. I like him. I don't love him. I think he's been a tad overrated.
Mm-hmm.
I think, he was a part of that defense that got ran over by Jacksonville in that playoff game. Like they couldn't stop the run to save their lives. And he was a big part of that. Mm-hmm. There were other issues on that defense, but he can't take no blame for that loss. He's always kind of turned me off with the chirping on social media, vote for me for the Pro Bowl. Please vote for me for the Pro Bowl. That turns me off a little bit. You're either a Pro Bowler or you're not. I mean, campaigning for votes, I'm sure the players do it. I just don't like it. And now at his age, to be demanding, pouting for a new contract, that really turned me off. It's like, what are we looking for here, Cam? You're a 35-year-old defensive tackle. What are we looking for?
And he dropped Cleveland as a possibility?
Oh, that was the – I don't understand that.
A little Godfather for you. That I do not forgive.
I mean, who are you trying to tweak there? The ownership and general managers don't care if you bring up Cleveland. That's a middle finger to the fans, basically.
Exactly. Absolutely, yeah.
Omar Khan doesn't care if you bring up Cleveland. It's the fans and people on Twitter. You want to create a storm. Jesus. Bring up Cleveland.
Let me ask you a question. We were talking about wide receivers earlier. Let's say Cleveland loses its mind for a few minutes and calls up and says, we'll give you Amari Cooper for Cam Hayward straight up. Ooh. Do you do it?
Here's the thing. What's the defensive line look without Cam Hayward? It's
personally, I think Keanu Benton is our best defensive lineman at this point.
I agree with you.
I think Cam is still very good.
But the drop-off after those two is steep.
Right.
I'm not a big Ogunjobi fan. And then after that...
I like Larry Ogunjobi. I think he was the difference for Cincinnati the year they went to the Super Bowl. He made such an impact on their defensive line. He's gotten older. He's not quite as good. I mean, I still think he's a solid rotational guy.
Yeah, he's a Jekyll and Hyde type. You see good and bad. But if you're depending on him with Cam Hayward out, with Cam Hayward gone, and then you're who's the third guy after that?
Think about last year when Cam was out half the year. I mean, was the run defense really that much better with Cam than without Cam?
That's never been a strength. It's never been a strength. He's a pass rusher more than anything else, I think. Right. I'd entertain it. I would entertain it. I definitely would.
I'm no Amari Cooper fan. I think he's highly
if the wide receiver
overrated.
was a little better than that, I would jump. You had me on the edge there.
Yeah.
I mean, but when you think about Amari Cooper versus the rest of this wide receiver room, I mean, that's a big upgrade too. Yeah. So
I'm a huge George Pickens fan. I have been, and you were kind of talking about Tomlin and personnel. I thought it was a huge mistake, and I lay this at the feet of Tomlin last year with the rookie class, because I'm beyond over the moon about last year's rookie class, and I really am excited about this year's rookie class. I think Omar and Andy Weidel have done a ridiculously good job of restocking. But when I start to look at, hey, why wasn't Broderick Jones playing left tackle, and why did it take half the season and Chooks to say something? Well, did he really say something dumb?
Who knows?
On the sideline? Yeah, I don't put it past that. Joey Porter didn't get on the field for a month. How could you be watching? You're a defensive coach. You cut your teeth coaching defensive backs. Look, I like Pat Pete, and I've said this repeatedly. He's a Hall of Fame person. He's a Hall of Fame player. He's not very good anymore.
No, yeah, he was a Hall of Fame player, not anymore.
Yeah, I mean, Joe Montana's a great quarterback. I don't want him playing quarterback for the Steelers next year.
Yeah.
So, I mean, how can you look at that and evaluate the talent and not realize Joey Porter Jr. is the best secondary guy we got? And why didn't he get on the field more? Now, yes, by the end of the year, he's traveling with receivers and everything else. But you got to look at it and say, Terrell Austin, how can you look at that? This is why I was not a fan of Pat Meyer being retained, especially with the Arthur Smith connection to Mike Munchak, although I have some debate in my mind whether Munchak told Arthur Smith, I don't care what you do, I'm not going back and working for Tomlin.
You think so?
I think it's possible.
Yeah.
Because Munchak, I think he was on Dan Patrick, was very adamant he wants to get back into coaching now that he's healthy. So what? I mean, it's a no-brainer.
That's disappointing.
Yeah, a Hall of Famer. Yeah. And
I make the
Meyer,
point. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
no, I was going to say Meyer was the genius who decided that Dan Moore and Chooks were better than Broderick. And I'm sorry, I am no Dan Moore fan. I mean, the fact that, he comes back training camp this year and or OTAs and people start asking Dan, have you worked on playing the right side? Nope. What do you mean no? You ain't playing left tackle.
He's got the
I
whole team convinced he can't play right tackle. He's got Tomlin saying it. He's got everyone saying it. He can't play right tackle. Well, why can't he? If Broderick Jones had to, why can't Dan Moore?
yeah. I think
I'm with you 100% on Pat Meyer. Everyone I have on the podcast who starts to defend him, I ask the question, show me the offensive lineman who's improved since he's been here. I've seen offensive linemen improve that have left, Dotson and company, but
even Kendrick Green.
Kendrick Green was serviceable playing guard for the Texans for a little while there. Mm-hmm. Who on this team's improved? As Dan Moore hasn't.
I think maybe you could say James Daniels a little bit.
James Daniels was already good before he came, right? He should. My point is he should be better than he has been.
I know Brian Baldinger is no fan of James Daniels. But I also think that this year, which I'm really interested to see that battle play out between Mason McCormick and Daniels because he's going into the last year of his contract. I think Daniels will ultimately win it, and we'll know going into the end of this is it for him, and he's going to move on. He'll get signed by somebody else. He's a good player, but
he'll make
Baldinger
money.
Baldinger's always said he's a better center. He's never played it down a center in the NFL than he is a guard, but I think if James Daniels is our worst offensive lineman this year, and I think there's a good chance he will be, that's not a bad thing. James Daniels is pretty good.
In theory, if they play everybody where they're supposed to play, this can be a very good offensive line. You're going to take your lumps early on because you got a rookie, right tackle, and really, essentially, Broderick Jones is a rookie left tackle because he hasn't played in the NFL. He played 8 games at right tackle, and you got a rookie center, so you're going to take your lumps early. But second half of the season, this should be a dynamite offensive line. How long does it take Mike Tomlin to decide to have Broderick Jones at left tackle, and Fuatano at right tackle? Does he start with Dan Moore? That's going to drive us all crazy. And I've heard, rumblings that Herbig's played well at center, and God forbid he starts the season as the starting center instead of Zach Frazier. If they seem to be able to botch this line.
Yeah, going back to Baldy though, he was a huge Herbig fan when they brought him in. He said he said all along last year he would have benched Daniels and played Herbig if it was him. I don't know how true that is, but he did have a couple pretty decent years. I mean, anything's got to be an improvement over Mason Cole, but I think it would be a huge mistake not to put Zach Frazier in unless he's just, hey, I'm a rookie and he really can't handle it to start. And I think we'll see that in the preseason. But
yeah, he's got a lot of experience at center. It's not like he's switching positions like Kendrick Green did. He's got a lot of experience at center. So I'm a big fan of start your draft picks early. Unless
it's a lingering thing from the broken leg. But let's face it. One thing, if we get off to a slow start, and this is the only reason I would maybe go along with Herbig, I will not go along with Dan Moore. If Dan Moore is playing left tackle, we ain't making the playoffs. So Herbig, I could 100%. Maybe see if he's a little bit ahead of Frazier and Wilson is comfortable with him.
Yeah, I guess I could see that.
Yeah, I could maybe see that. I don't want to see it. I want to see Zach Frazier win the job outright, but I could maybe see it. But let's face it. If we don't go at least 7-2 in the first half of the season, yes, we're playing the AFC North in the second half of the season, and I don't think that's as big a disadvantage as a lot of people do because we've done so well against the AFC North. That Philadelphia, Kansas City mixed in is where I think, especially the stretch where we go Philly, Baltimore at Baltimore, and then KC at home. I think 6 years in a row we've lost 3 games in a row. If it's going to happen this year, that's the only stretch I could see it legitimately happening. If it happens in the first half of the season, we're talking about Tomlin extension, he should be fired. There's no way we should lose 3 in a row when you have to get off to a fast start.
Yeah, agreed. I made the point. He's got a lot of pressure. Mike Tomlin has a lot of pressure on him this year. There should be no excuses for
Right.
this team, short of a tough schedule, but that's not really an excuse. Especially if they get the number 2 receiver they're looking for, then there's no excuses. He's got a defense that he wants. He got Patrick Queen. You got Dante Jackson. Those are guys he's always coveted. The defense is stacked. The offense, you've got a couple of options. You got a veteran quarterback. You've got talent on that offense. There's a lot of pressure on Mike Tomlin this year. He's had the Kenny Pickett excuse for the last 2 seasons since Ben retired, so he doesn't have that to fall back on anymore.
And if you believe the national media, which I don't, then he's been saddled with Ben for 3 years before. I mean, the hurt year in 20. First of all, Ben threw 30 touchdowns in 2020. He was pretty darn good. Yes, did he lose something off his deep ball? He sure did. But you know what? Not a lot of defenses figured him out. And in 2021, 7 come from behind wins, most in the NFL. I would have signed up for Ben in 22 again, no issue. But I think a lot is going to be on Arthur Smith too, because if he comes out, let's face it, teams know we want to run the ball. We got Najee and Jalen. They're going to put 8 guys in the box. They're not going to care that Russell Wilson is there, Justin Fields is there. So if they do that, Russell Wilson or Justin Fields, and it's going to be Russell Wilson, has got to take advantage of George Pickens right off the bat, like Mason did. Mason lined up, and he was the only guy who had the guts. And I remember Ben's podcast; he was saying this for 2 years. Look, if you line up and you see George Pickens one-on-one, I don't care what the play
Throw him the
is.
ball.
Throw it to him. See what happens.
100%. There's no excuse why he didn't. There is no excuse for it because we've seen it over and over again. When he's one-on-one, he's nearly unstoppable. So what are we doing?
Yeah, and if you watched the line last year, once Broderick got in, because the run game really took off once he got in. But one thing I even noticed about Broderick in the preseason when he was in, when it was a running play, and since Ben, even the last year of Ben, since Najee, guys were in the backfield. They're hitting them in the backfield. But if you watch Broderick, he was always, I got my guy, and I'm going to the next level to get the next guy. He was blocking downfield. So you could see a push coming off the line. The only problem was, beyond Seumalo a little bit, the rest of the line wasn't getting that push. And now I think a guy like Frazier with that wrestling background, I mean, you could really have a nice force on the left side, and a Fatano who, before they drafted him, I was very much of the opinion Steelers hadn't picked a Pac-12 player since Juju, that I didn't think they were going to take him. But then I started watching the tape, and I was like, ooh, this guy's a run blocker. And even though he's a left tackle, it was for a left-handed quarterback. So he's in that road grader position. So I'm excited. I mean, like I said, I think Daniels, he could, if McCormick looks good in the run game, and let's face it, as much as they want to pass block and let Russell Wilson throw it, if Russell Wilson's throwing the ball more than 25 or 30 times a game, we got a problem.
Big problem.
We need to get back to the, hey, we run it 40 times because we can. I mean, and I think, personally, I don't know how you feel about it. I think Najee, I understand why he'd be upset they didn't pick the 5th-year option up, but if I was him, I would be with Jalen Warren's agent and the two of them going, we work best as a tandem in Pittsburgh. Figure out how much you want to pay to running backs, and we'll split it. If it's 60-40 Najee because he's the first-round draft pick who gets most of it, it's a huge raise for an undrafted free agent. I mean, I'd like to see us spend, like a 6-4 split on those two and keep them together, because I think if Najee goes somewhere else, he's not going to have nearly the success he's had with Jalen. And I also don't think Jalen will be as effective without Najee.
I agree with you on that they're best as a tandem, for sure. I think Najee wants to test free agency. I think he wants to push the limit. I mean, he was in those running back Zoom meetings they had when they thought they were underpaid and everything else. I think he's going to walk. I really believe that. I think he may have had something to do with why they didn't pick up his option. He probably asked, begged, pleaded that they didn't, because he wants to test free agency.
Which is a huge risk. I mean,
it is a risk. It is a risk. But
Saquon Barkley had to fight tooth and nail. He got a nice little bump in the contract ultimately, but he's not playing for the Giants anymore. He's playing for
Yeah,
Philadelphia.
yeah, true. It's a tough position. And what concerns me about Najee and giving him a long term deal is he's had a lot of carries. He doesn't have he hasn't been in the league that long, but there's already a lot of wear and tear on that body. So
I think
I
they've
was in
done a
favor of them picking up that 50-year option and then moving on. I could see why they didn't because it's a guaranteed contract, and if he gets hurt this season, then you're kind of stuck with him if has some kind of catastrophic injury.
Mhm.
I still think I would have preferred them picking up the 50-year option and going one more year with those two,
They
and then
could still
see where you are at that point.
they could still franchise him if they. I mean, if push
Yeah,
comes to shove, I don't know how happy he'd be about that. But I mean, based on I personally in an open market, I mean, there's a lot of people who like the idea of Najee who somehow think he's a Derrick Henry and the Steelers' offensive line has held him back. And to a point, I could kind of agree with that. But Najee has, and it's not even necessarily his fault, but he has developed some really bad habits. Jalen has forced him out of those a little bit, but he's still. There was a couple times last year where you could see here's the hole, and he's dancing, and he danced into a loss. He's a big back, just run straight ahead, and I think Jalen has helped him get there. But I think if he goes somewhere else and he thinks he's going to be some 350 carry, touch it every play back. I mean, there's not very many of those guys left anymore. Even Derrick Henry shared carries last year.
let's do this again. Let's switch gears to the Antonio Brown on the Pivot podcast a couple of days ago. He's quite the character. I listened to it again this morning just to refresh my memory, so because I knew we were going to talk about it today.
Mm-hmm.
Boy, how many times did he say trauma in a 45-minute podcast? Holy mackerel. He's something else.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know with AB. I just, there was a time where I was a fan, and I still kind of am, but I'm not on this romanticized, he's the greatest receiver ever type of deal. I mean, you ask me, I mean, if I'm picking Steelers all time guys, he's not in my starting wide receiver group. I mean, if top two, he'd be in my top three. Stallworth and Ward, you give me Stallworth and Ward, and you can have Brown and Swan, and I think I'll beat you every time because
Ooh.
those were too tough. I mean, Hines, and I argue with people on social media all the time about this. Hines is top 20 in receptions, touchdowns, and receiving yards. But everybody thinks he's some just glorified physical cheap shot artist who doesn't belong in the Hall of Fame. Well, what guy is in the top 20 of all three of those categories who isn't in the Hall of Fame? But yeah, I would rather have Hines if you're going to play Steeler football. And to me, Stallworth has always been the best Steelers receiver. And he played in a time where you didn't really, he wasn't catching 10 passes a game. But he was virtually uncoverable, especially in big games. That catch he made against the Rams that won the Super Bowl, the last Super Bowl for us, there are not very many people on this planet who can make that catch. And if you haven't seen it, go back and look. I mean, how he got his head in a helmet, and especially in '70s helmets, back that far to see that ball, it was amazing. With Mark Malone, he caught 1,000 yards.
Yeah, people forget that.
Yeah, if people don't understand, Mark Malone for a long time held the longest Steeler reception in history for 90 yards. That was his claim to fame, and getting shellacked by Dan Marino in the AFC Championship game.
AFC Championship game, yep.
Which, I mean, I don't know. I mean, AB, I don't buy into the CTE stuff. I don't buy into any of that stuff. I should be some great legendary Steeler that, you can't give my number away. Hey, folks, at times, Jack Lambert's 58 got worn. Joe Green, well, they retired Joe Green, but a lot of these great players, usually it's in the preseason, they slap the number on somebody. I mean, it's one of those things where you look at and say, what special thing do you have? You quit on the team. Everybody seems to give him a pass on that. We had a chance to make the playoffs after that debacle, and he quit on the team. So can he retire as a Steeler? Sure. Should he go in the Ring of Honor at some point? Sure. Is he going to make the Hall of Fame? Probably. I won't be happy if he makes it before Hines. But yeah, I mean, just all that stuff. I don't understand where his head's at. And I think about. I made this point last week on our podcast when we were talking about Tomlin. AB should still be playing. He should still
Of
be playing.
course, of course.
He's only 35.
Yeah, he's his own worst enemy. And I'll admittedly, I kind of have a soft spot for Antonio Brown
Mm-hmm.
because I do think he's one of these scrappy guys that, sixth round pick, like he brought up 15 times in that podcast as well. But it's true. He had to fight. There was a lot of good wide receivers in that room, and he had to fight to get on the field.
Mm-hmm.
The stuff he did is inexcusable. The stuff he did in Pittsburgh, in Oakland, and with Tampa after that, it's inexcusable. The stuff he did. But
Do you believe Ben
just
really
between,
fought for him?
I was going to bring that up later, but we can get into it now. He's done a complete 180 on Ben Roethlisberger. Ben
Yeah.
Roethlisberger was public enemy number one just a few years ago. Now, we're going to go in the Hall of Fame together. He fought for me to get on the field. I don't think I don't know if I believe anything Antonio Brown says.
Right.
Anything.
And I would say if that's true, then what you did to Ben on the way out of town to
Yeah.
me is virtually unforgivable.
Yeah.
And to all of a sudden say Bruce Arians had it out for him, okay, yes, Tom Brady had a lot to do with him going to Tampa. But Bruce Arians was the coach. He had to sign off on it. I mean, he gave him an opportunity to get on the field. Just because you want to be Tom Brady's security blanket, you ain't better than Mike Evans. You ain't better than Chris Godwin. You could be
No.
our third wide receiver. And let's not forget they had Gronk. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
and now to all of a sudden say Bruce Arians didn't like me. Yeah, Bruce Arians didn't want him back, but that's because I want to say he only coached him, I think, for one season in Pittsburgh.
Didn't Arians say something about him prior to all that? Like he would never want him on his team or
Yeah,
something?
that he didn't want him back.
Yeah. Obviously, you have Tom Brady on the team, and he comes to you and says he wants somebody. You go get him. You keep Tom Brady happy because he's the best quarterback of all time.
Yeah.
Did Bruce Arians bend on that? Probably. Did Bruce Arians probably not like him? I'm sure he had a million reasons not to like Antonio Brown. I'm sure, Antonio Brown gives you tons of reasons not to like him. It's as someone who liked him, it's hard to defend him.
Yeah.
It's almost impossible to defend him.
And he's a phenomenal talent. I mean, don't get it twisted. On the field, on the field, he was great. And there's no disputing how great he was. But if you look at it, I mean, we can all project. Yes, he probably gave away maybe taking a real run at Jerry Rice. Maybe, being a top 3 or 4 wide receiver of all time. If you say that now, let's be honest. I mean, with the way the passing game is going, 2 or 3 years, or I would say no more than a decade from now, he's going to be one of these guys like Andre Johnson, who I didn't think should have gotten into the Hall of Fame, who's just a fantasy darling, who was a blip on the radar. The most memorable thing about him, it's not going to be because he never won anything in Pittsburgh. Everybody knows it's going to be the Super Bowl run and the striptease. That's all people are going to remember about AB in the long term. Do I think he's going to pay a T.O. type of price? I would make the argument that T.O. was actually, for his career, was better than Antonio Brown because he was so much more effective for so much longer. I think peak AB and peak T.O., peak AB is better.
That's a good way to put it. Peak AB is as good as anybody.
Yeah.
Maybe short of Jerry Rice and maybe one other. But in his peak,
maybe Randy Moss, that
Randy
one year
Moss
where he was ridiculous.
Whose name was escaping me that I wanted to bring up. There's so much to unpack with him. Getting mad because they gave his 84 away. I kind of mentioned that too. I think the Steelers are a little too quick. If you don't want to retire numbers, that's fine. I think you put him in mothballs for a couple seasons at least. I mean, they gave Kendrick Green Pouncey's number. I'm like, come on. They do that a lot, and I don't understand it. Does AB deserve that kind of respect? Probably not after the way he left, but that's one of the points I can maybe make an argument for him.
At least it's been a decade. Almost a decade, I should say.
Yeah, true. Just listening to him speak, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again. every time he spouts off on social media, puts his potential Ring of Honor with the Steelers back a couple years, because they're not going to put a microphone in front of him at a Ring of Honor ceremony or a Hall of Fame ceremony
Yeah.
because they're afraid of what he's going to say.
Well, they got no choice at the Hall of Fame. He gets to make a speech. I mean,
That's why they're not going to vote. I don't think they'll vote him into the Hall of Fame until they think he's calmed down. I just can't see it.
You could almost make the argument it's better to take your lumps now than wait 5 or 6 years and imagine how bitter he's going to be. Let's say he gets the TO treatment. He has to wait 5, 6 years. I mean, we could be looking at a Michael Jordan level Hall of Fame speech.
That would be must-see TV. That would be
where he starts calling guys out. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my goodness.
Let me ask you a question. Not does he deserve to, but do you think Ben gets in on the first vote?
Yeah, I do. I think people realize how good a quarterback he was. I don't see a scenario where he doesn't get in on the first ballot. I really don't. How about you?
I hope so. I mean, if I was voting, I would vote him in, absolutely. But I remember when he retired, Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharpe, when they were still together, that's the first thing they brought up was all his off-the-field antics. I mean, it's 15 years ago. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, he played a lot of heroic football after the fact. I think the fact he didn't win a Super Bowl after all that maybe hurts him a little bit, but does he deserve to go in? Absolutely. Do I think the media will pull some shenanigans? I mean, I didn't think Hines Ward would have to wait this long. I mean, it's ridiculous.
I don't think Hines Ward is getting in. I could see an argument where he belongs in, and I'm a little bit on the fence on him, but he's just got. It's become, how do I phrase this? People have convinced themselves that he's not a Hall of Famer without giving him a fair shake with the stats, like you brought up. I think just people have in their mind that he's not a Hall of Famer. I think he's going to really struggle to get in.
Yeah, well, I think he will till the Veterans Committee. I think the Veterans Committee, he'll sail right in. But the fact that he'd have to wait, and he's not the first really great wide receiver who had to wait a long time. Art Monk comes to mind. He had to wait forever to get in. But then you look at a guy like the guy I at least twice a year I write this column. L.C. Greenwood should have been in the Hall of Fame in the 70s, or in the 80s. He should be in, and they don't. I got into ML football and all those guys with Gradishar and all those guys. I'm sorry, but the guy, he is still, I think, second all time in Super Bowl. He might even still be the leader. I have to refresh my memory in Super Bowl sacks. I mean, but they didn't count the stat then. Who he sacked 5 times? Roger Staubach. That's one of the hardest quarterbacks in history to sack, and he sacked him 5 times, 4 times in one game. I would honestly, Super Bowl 10 is. Look, do I love watching Swan catch the ball on the highlights? Yes. Was Swan a huge part of that game? Yes. But let's face it, L.C. Greenwood sacked Roger Staubach 4 times in a defensive battle that's 21-17. I think he should have been the MVP. And I think if he had been the MVP, Swan probably isn't in the Hall of Fame, and Greenwood is.
Yeah, I agree. 100%. I think that's about it on the Antonio Brown thing. God, I wish he'd just shut up. And stay off social media, get rid of that CTESPN thing, and just let it die.
I get a kick out of CTESPN. I think it's funny. I mean,
I do too, but every 4th or 5th tweet is something completely ridiculous that's going to get him in trouble.
Yeah.
When his team tweets for him, it's funny and amusing. When Antonio Brown decides to chime in on his own and say something, I mean, every time he speaks, he embarrasses the Steelers.
Yeah.
And like I said, they're never going to put him in the Ring of Honor. They're never going to do
it. They will at some point. I mean, when we're talking about they won't retire numbers, I brought this up a couple of weeks ago on our podcast. The one guy I'd like to see, everybody thinks Terry Bradshaw, and would I like to see Terry Bradshaw's number retired? Yes. Personally, I don't think they will because of the skipping Art Rooney's funeral. I think there's a little subtext there that the
Could be.
Rooneys are not going to do it. But Mel Blount is, to me, still the all-time best. You can tell me Deion Sanders all you want, and I'll say they didn't change the rules for Deion. He couldn't tackle anybody. Give me Mel Blount as the best cornerback ever. I'd like to see 47 retired, and I would love to see 58 and 59 together, Ham and Lambert.
Yeah.
I think that would be an awesome ceremony while these guys are still alive. And I wouldn't, if they came out tomorrow and said they're retiring Bradshaw, great. I happy, love to see it. I'm a huge Terry Bradshaw fan. I just, the fact they chose Franco over Terry, I understand why with the Immaculate Reception. But now, if you're going to start to bleed in a couple, I mean, why not Bradshaw? Other than, let's face it, his first 5 years weren't that great, but he still won 4 Super Bowls, and he's the only Steelers MVP.
Yeah. It's a mystery why Blunt and Lambert and Ham are not, and even Bradshaw are not retired. It's,
Yeah.
I don't know how they go through the decision making on that stuff. It's bizarre. Um,
I understand because then you got Palomalu, then you got Ben.
yeah, it's a
Then you
lot of
got,
numbers. It's a
yeah,
lot
it's
of
a
numbers.
lot
You're
of
right.
numbers.
It's true. They would have what? They could probably conceivably have 20 to 25 numbers retired, which kind of makes it,
88, 86, 82, eighty
yeah.
four, maybe. I mean,
Yeah, you could make the
that's,
argument for 84. I mean,
yeah,
and
yeah,
then you
that's
could
half
start
the
making the
wide
argument
receiver.
for Ben's number and on and on and on. Yeah.
I would,
Palomalu.
I would love to see Harrison and Greg Lloyd get their numbers retired. But I mean, at some point, you got to be like, okay, guys, look, we can't retire all the numbers.
Yeah, exactly. One last thing before I let you go. Hard Knocks is going to do the AFC North in season, which
Yeah.
I am super excited for. I didn't ever think I'd see the day where they got even a piece of the Steelers on there. Um, are you in with the conspiracy theorists that this is why they backloaded the AFC North games for the Steelers to the second half of the season? Um, I don't think it's that far fetched when you're trying
Yeah.
to build a product and
Yeah.
you want the best games later on in the season for your Hard Knocks thing.
Then again, if there really is a script, then it's hard to. I mean, let's face it. It's been on 2001. It's been on the air 23 years. You couldn't get a hold of Pittsburgh. So, is this how you get a side door into it? And I was listening today. I forget who said it. Hard Knocks thrives on conflict. And who's going to be the antagonist for Pittsburgh? Who's going to be the guy behind the scenes that there's could it be Pickens if the
I was
season's
going to say
going bad?
that's the one name. If the offense is struggling, George Pickens is the guy.
Yeah,
Definitely.
but then again, could it be Cam? Could it be, let's say they don't get the contract done. Could it be Cam behind the scenes? Could this put TJ in a bad light? I mean, personally, I think, and I don't think I don't say this is a bad thing. I think TJ is a me guy. And I'm okay with that. When you're that good, you should be a me guy.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, Cam Hayward is not nearly the talent TJ Watt is. TJ Watt should be the captain of the team. But if Cam dropped out today, said, I retire, I'm not going to play anymore, the captain's going to be Minka.
I was just going to say, Minka's my guy.
Yeah.
If they pick another captain.
He's the next leader. And I think TJ has in the past, there's been a little whispers here and there that, hey, I'm out for mine, I'm not out for the team. I don't think he's not a team player, but I think he is focused on how can an edge rusher best help the team? He should be focused on sacks. He's a complete defender. Anybody who watches the Steelers knows.
Yeah.
Hey, look, he's good against the run. He's good in pass coverage. That whole I'm only out for sacks, Myles Garrett, absolutely. But but it's weird that you talking about the Steelers' all-time sack leader, and there's a chance he's going to make a real run. I mean, I don't think he'll get to Bruce Smith because he won't play that long. But, I mean, he could end up with 150 sacks plus
Easily.
and make it unbreakable here in Pittsburgh. Why that guy isn't a captain, although I really like what I heard out of him with going after Russell Wilson and all the postseason moves, was, hey, we're not winning playoff games. I want to win playoff games. I don't care how we do it, but what we're doing ain't working.
Yeah, I mean, you could be a tremendous individual player, but legacy is winning Super Bowls in football. This is not baseball where we count stats. Winning Super Bowls is what people see.
It
And
isn't. It is in Pittsburgh. That's why I have that argument about Cam Hayward, and to a lesser extent TJ. That's TJ's not in my top five Steeler defenders of all time, and he won't be unless he has some postseason success.
I had this argument with my co-host. It's a little bit more difficult for a defensive player to impact the game like that. I think that's legit for quarterbacks, measuring them through championships. I mean, how much more could you ask of TJ Watt? It's not his fault that they haven't won playoff games under him. I mean, he's been phenomenal.
Well, look at that
Uh,
defense. I We had this
yeah, I
argument
know.
about the
I
Cleveland
know.
game.
Yeah, I know. I know.
If
I
you're an all world, all time defense, defensive player, like let's face it, if it had been and we saw this in the '80s, Lambert at the end of his career, he could still bow up and impact a game and decide a win or a loss. That game where they fell behind 28-0 to Cleveland, come on. It's not like they threw pick sixes. And yes, it was terrible. They put the defense in awful positions, but you got to bow up and hold them to a field goal. You
yeah,
just got to.
yeah. The defensive struggles over the last 10 years, 6 years. I blame a lot on Mike Tomlin.
Yeah.
I don't like their defensive schemes a lot of times. I don't like their defensive game plans a lot of times. He's supposed to be a defensive coach. I think he's been outcoached a lot on defense, and that's where I put the blame. Could TJ Watt have played better in some of these playoff games? Sure. Could Cam Hayward? Sure. I think they're put in bad positions by Mike Tomlin, honestly.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's not so much that I'm not criticizing TJ and Cam as players. Could they have done a little more? Maybe. I mean, TJ got us a freaking touchdown against Kansas City to put us
Kansas
up
City right
7
off the bat,
nothing.
right? Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
Yep.
yes, I think TJ has done more than Cam Hayward in the playoffs, but it's not. Let's face it. At least Cam has the one win. TJ doesn't have any. But you know, yes, you need a complete defense. But one of the things I always talk about was Tomlin came from the Tampa 2. And when you say it however you want, he ran LeBeau out of town. LeBeau left on his own. I'm sorry, but the fact that he went to Tennessee, I think he got ran out of town. You turned Blitzburg into a 3-4 Tampa 2, in my opinion. We are not nearly as aggressive with blitzing, especially since Mike Hilton left. I mean, and maybe that's because TJ and Alex and Bud Dupree briefly and Cam have been so good generating a four-man pass rush that they felt like they couldn't do it. But I mean, let's face it. I mean, we had some great secondaries, and we were still blitzing like crazy, and just harassing the quarterbacks. You want to turn the ball over? Make the quarterback throw it immediately, not just. I mean, I don't know how you felt about this, but when Tom Brady used to just sit there and sit there and sit there and then pick us apart, I was like, just go
crazy.
man and zero blitz. What's he going to do? Score a touchdown faster?
Tom Brady and Bill Belichick had the Steelers number
Oh, yeah.
defensively. They could have rolled out of bed and beat the Steelers every time until towards the end when somehow the Steelers started to catch up. But it was years of dominance by New England before, the last couple of times they played Tom Brady, they actually played pretty well. But yeah, that was the most frustrating 4 or 5 years, maybe longer than that I've.
And those of you who think Belichick lost his fastball, played the Steelers twice without Tom Brady. He's 2-0. And they were terrible last year, and they still beat us.
Oh, my God. I live in New England,
Mm-hmm.
and I am a Steelers fan, and it's absolutely brutal.
Oh, yeah.
When the Steelers lose around, it's just you can't even imagine. And I'm a huge Bill Belichick fan, regardless if I think he was a genius. I think he coached the pants off Mike Tomlin almost every single time. It was unfair before they stepped on the field.
That's the one thing I say about Tomlin. And any huge Mike Tomlin fan, I would challenge you to name the one time where, especially since the Super Bowl and even before then, since Dick LeBeau and Bruce Arians left, name me the one time that you were watching a game and thought, wow, we really out schemed that team. We really out
No,
coached that team. We don't. He
no.
relies on his players, which isn't a bad thing. He's a player's guy. He leaves it 100% up to his players, and it's an awful convenient outlet to say, oh, well, you can't blame him. You got to blame the players. You know, we
Yeah.
had this argument last week on the Tomlin episode. Well, you can't blame him for his players, and you can't blame him for his coaches because it's not his fault he hired Matt Canada and Randy Fichtner and all these other guys, the Bum of the Month Club. So what exactly is Mike Tomlin responsible for if he's not responsible for his coaches? He's not responsible for his players.
The Tomlin lovers always bring up, well, he didn't hire the coaches. They were picked out for him, and I just don't buy it.
I only buy Todd Haley on that because
Yeah,
they
after Todd
basically admitted
Haley,
it.
after Todd Haley, he's got too much credibility. He's got too much pull in the organization to tell him. He's too many wins. You can't tell a coach like that who to pick. He's too big now. He's had too many wins, too many successful seasons. You can't tell him who he's going to pick as an offensive coordinator or any coach.
Yeah.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it for a second. You're right. Todd Haley was probably, and ironically enough, Todd Haley was probably the best offensive coordinator they've had since him,
Yeah.
So maybe they should have been picking for him instead of letting him do it.
Well, I mean, I truly believe that when he was hired in 07, you have Dick Cowher was not planned. And no matter what anybody tells you, if Cowher's wife isn't, unfortunately health situation and passed away, I don't think there's any reason or any way, and he's talked about this, he leaves the Steelers. So now all of a sudden I'm leaving the Steelers and I have Hall of Fame player and defensive coordinator Dick LeBeau, and I got Bruce Arians coming off Ken Wisenhunt, who's doing a really good job. Mike, can I replace the staff? Yeah, you can replace anybody not named Arians or LeBeau. And then LeBeau probably sat there and said, if you can't any of my guys, I'm walking. And then, okay, yes, did Arians make a huge mistake by trying to set up Ben for the MVP in the Packers Super Bowl? Yeah, it probably cost him his job. And them bringing in Haley saying they wanted to protect Ben, no, that was, we're going to get your best friend out of there. We're going to put Haley in. And I think the behind-the-scenes conflict between those two really cost the Steelers behind the scenes because it was almost, and Ben's to blame for this too, call whatever you want. I don't care. I'm going to do what I want on the field.
Mm.
And did it work? Not really.
No. Bob, this is a great discussion. I really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah,
we
it was
do this
fun.
again sometime. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And
again,
and we expect you to come on ours sometime too.
Absolutely. Send me the invite and I'll be there.
Okay.
Once again, you can find Bob on the Steel City Rings podcast. Check it out. It's a good podcast. It's a great podcast. Go give him a follow. And Bob, we hope to have you on again soon. And thanks for coming on.
Yeah, anytime.
All right. And thanks, everybody, for listening to the Steel Sanctuary podcast.